We're here today with Father Anthony Cekada, who is the translator and introducer of the Ottaviani intervention, both in its former iteration with TAN Publishers and now in a new, very attractive publication by Philothea Press, which came out at the same time as Father's book on the Mass, Work of Human Hands. Father, when one looks at this volume, we're confronted by what we often see with short works that have gained so much traction over the years that the preface, the introduction, is almost as long as the work itself. I remember seeing in English class this that there, we'd have a critical essay, and then there were probably 20 essays surrounding it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that probably says a lot about the enduring quality of the Ottaviani intervention and why it's important for us. But I think that a lot of people get to look at the Ottaviani intervention early on in their trad career, say coming into traditionalism, because it's safe to read it. A cardinal wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't get into trouble. It's not anything disobedient, and it's written with a really lovely cover letter.
Yeah.
But I wanted to read from the cover letter, which I suppose is the cold water in the face
Mm-hmm.
for anybody who thinks that the Novus Ordo was simply a translation from the Latin rite of Mass. Despite its brevity, so this is in a cover letter that the Cardinal wrote, despite its brevity, the study shows quite clearly that the Novus Ordo Missae, considering the new elements susceptible to widely different interpretations which are implied or taken for granted, represents, both as a whole and in its details, a striking departure from the Catholic theology of the Mass as it was formulated in Session 22 of the Council of Trent. The canons of the rite definitively fixed at that time erected an insurmountable barrier against any heresy which might attack the integrity of the mystery. Now, Father, I have to say at that point, that's a put down the book moment.
Well, sure. Yeah.
Striking departure both as a whole and in its details. One might ask how the Cardinal is able to write this as simply an intellectual critique when he clearly has a visceral reaction to what's going on with the new Mass. How can we contextualize this back in 1969 when this was given to Paul VI, and now, so many years, so many decades later, looking back at it?
Well, those particular comments that the Cardinal made were in the context of this sort of ongoing liturgical revolution. And someone like Cardinal Ottaviani, or even someone like myself, I was just a seminarian at that point, you could see the attacks being made on the Catholic liturgy, on the Mass, and on the underlying doctrines. Specifically the doctrines of the Council of Trent, the teaching of the Council of Trent about the mystery of the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass. So at this particular moment, these ideas are very much in the air that the faith of the Mass, in fact, are being attacked. And his letter, in effect, is saying that what you have is another attack on on Catholic teaching represented by this new rite. So this is an extremely striking statement, and as you say, it is a put down the book moment.
We discussed in another interview on your book on the new Mass the definition of the Mass as given in the 1969 General Instruction, and of course, as Cardinal Ottaviani and the writers of the study put together, they cite the same definition. They say the definition is the Lord's Supper or Mass is the sacred assembly or congregation of the people of God gathering together with a priest presiding to celebrate the memorial of the Lord. The study then goes on to say, the instruction further characterizes the supper as an assembly presided over by a priest and held as a memorial of the Lord to recall what he had done Holy Thursday. None of this, in the very least, implies the real presence, the reality of the sacrifice, the sacramental function of the priest who consecrates, the intrinsic value of the Eucharistic sacrifice, independent of the presence of the assembly. And when I see bullet points like that talking about omissions, I'm thinking this looks like a traditionalist tract. Normally, a traditionalist tract will list all the things that are gone.
Yes.
Well, Cardinal Ottaviani wrote the first traditionalist tract here. He's listing everything that's missing.
Well, you could almost say that the Ottaviani intervention represents sort of the charter of the traditionalist movement. There was resistance to the liturgical changes up to this point, and complaints, and these were very diffused. But in the Ottaviani intervention, you find it crystallized, sort of put together almost in one point, where someone says that, all right, this is at the heart of the problem. And so you see in the Ottaviani intervention, in effect, the charter of the traditionalist resistance to the new Mass and to the whole liturgical revolution.
And when you say resistance, Father, you would characterize that as a refusal to go along with the changes, as opposed to a simple sort of intellectual preference for the old rite. Is that
yes,
correct?
You're not going to accept it, period. And you're not going to have anything to do with it. And that's the underlying conclusion, the practical conclusion that you draw from that. That it's not Catholic, and we have to resist it. We can't accept this change.
If we look at the scope of the decades since the Ottaviani intervention, we can say in some ways it's failed, it's succeeded, failed, succeeded, in terms of it succeeded in forcing a change in the general instruction, but it failed because ultimately it didn't stop the change of the Novus Ordo going into effect worldwide.
That's correct.
It succeeded because the spirit of it lived on in traditionalist priests and congregations, which led to an indult, which led to a motu proprio, which led to another motu proprio. And now you can get fiddleback vestments anywhere.
Sure.
In that realm of succeed, fail, why do you think the Ottaviani intervention is sort of a great first read for someone who's new to the traditionalist movement?
Well, it's short and it's easy, and it puts things very clearly.
Well, that's good.
Excellent. And be bright, be brief, and be gone. The three rules of good and effective writing. And it says an awful lot in just a few pages. It's very, very concentrated writing. And so from that point of view, it's extremely effective. It makes an impression on people. You say that, this was said at this particular time in history when the new Mass came out, and this nailed some of the main problems that I now, so-and-so, say 35 years later, when I'm trying to figure this out, that I've felt about the new Mass, coming to this as say, a layman who has come to the traditional Mass for the first time and who's compared it to the new Mass.
Father, how did you first become involved in this project of translation? Because as I alluded to, you did this for TAN under that edition before that was suppressed. And now you've brought it, it's been brought back out by another publishing house. How did you get involved in the project in the first place?
Well, again, it was wanting to have a text to give to people to read. Naturally, since it was such an important text for those who wanted to understand the difficulty with liturgical reforms, I wanted to give it to people. So I started trying to find translations or versions of it that could be easily reproduced. And I found that the only ones in English that were available were written in terrible English. Or they left many of the terms untranslated. And obviously a layman who is new to the traditional movement is not going to have the facility to understand those terms. So there is that problem as well. There's also a difficulty with the citations in the editions that existed in English. It was very difficult to look up the citations to different documents that these translations had provided. So there's this real need to provide a fresh translation of it. So having tried to find good translations in English, I just resolved to do one myself.
And so that's where we have, I think, a lot of the, whether it's available on the internet or here, a lot of people don't realize they're reading sometimes your handiwork.
Oh, heaven forbid.
Might not be cited.
The fortunate thing is a year or two before I had decided on this project, then Monsignor Gerard de Laurier issued a definitive edition in Latin and French of the text of the Ottaviani intervention. He himself, at that point, Father Gerard de Laurier, he was the originator of this text. He put it together. He, in effect, is its author. He wrote it. And he dictated it in French and Italian simultaneously. And so there are two texts of it. And eventually, he reissued all of these texts, so I could have I had a good original to work from.
So the Latin and French, so the language of the church and the language of God.
No, excuse me, the Italian and French, the language of good pasta and a fine food, if you will. So.
So that's the source text that you work.
Yes,
on.
Yes.
Was Archbishop Lefebvre not also involved in this in some way?
Yes, he was one of the contacts in the that the originators of the Ottaviani intervention had in Roman circles. He, I believe, was living in Rome at that time, and he had a reputation for being conservative because of his work at the Second Vatican Council with the Cetus, the more conservative fathers. So he was among the group of people who were consulted in this project. And he tried to get other bishops interested in it as well.
Why did we not see his signature on the ultimate cover letter? Was he just too lowly? Was it a Cardinals only?
Well, I think it was a Cardinals only club.
Okay.
There was the difficulty, though, that the text had been prematurely published by someone in France, and there would have been more signatures to the cover letter that Ottaviani had put together if it had not been prematurely publicized. In fact, I think one of the signers was going to be the former head of the Congregation of Rites, Cardinal Lorona. So there were a number of very prominent cardinals and prelates who were interested in this, but the premature publication of it scared everyone off.
I'm sure that's exactly the effect that the leaker wanted, probably.
I guess so, yeah.
Towards the end of as it's titled, short critical study, and again, I as someone who loves reading and loves long works, I encourage any of the viewers of the interview that it's not long, and it's not written in a difficult manner. It's quite straightforward. At the end of the short critical study, there's a reference to the imprecations of quo primum.
Mm-hmm.
And if we haven't been living under a liturgical curse since 1969, you don't. I think whoever would say that doesn't have eyes. But I think it was so prescient to say in 1960. I think the date here is 5 June 1969. To reference, and I'll just read directly from here, the grave situation fully justified and even rendered prophetic the saintly pontiff's solemn warning given in 1570 at the end of the bull promulgating his missal. Should anyone presume to lay a hand on this, let him know that he shall incur the wrath of God Almighty and his holy apostles Peter and Paul. And I've cited this before to some of my conservative Novus Ordo friends, and the notion is, well, Stephen, that's the language that they used back then. That was sort of the good bang to let them know that the document was finished.
Mm-hmm.
I said, yes, I do realize that, but it does say that there's a curse here with messing with this. And we look now, so many years later, 40 some years later, are we living under the curse of quo primum? Is that a good way to put it?
We're living under the curse of the Mass of Paul VI, I would say. And I suppose that's the curse of quo primum. That's an interesting way of looking at it. I never quite thought of that language at the end of the bull in those terms. Of course, it is a standard legal formula. But certainly in a larger sense, what you say is true, because to effect such a global shift in the worship of the church, there are bound to be some effects to it. St. Thomas talks about the danger all the time of changing a law and of the danger to the common good. Certainly this is also true when you speak about liturgical changes, because liturgy and belief are intimately connected. And to change the content, the radical way of the sacred liturgy, is to change people's belief as well. And that certainly has been the curse of the new Mass. Because of these changes, people have come to a different and false understanding of the theology of the Mass.
And we are where we are today as a result.
Unfortunately, yes.
So to know where we are and where we're currently going, it's useful to go back to see where this all started.
Precisely. Yeah.
So for those interested in getting the book, which not only obviously has the text, but some helpful translation notes and a preface written by a Father Anthony Cekada, one can go to philotheapress.com and order the books directly in their bulk discounts for bookstores. Thanks so much for your time today, Father.
Thank you, Stephen.